to the November 2023 edition of AMAASE, Ask Me Anything About Social Enterprise. This is your opportunity to ask those burning social enterprise questions. My name is Christine Spottiswoode. I normally fill my days as the project lead for ABC, and today I'm honored to be your host. Just a quick note that today's session is recorded for those who are unable to attend the live session, or if you wish to go back and rewatch this discussion or any other previous AMAASE sessions. I would like to start by acknowledging that I am joining you today from just outside Edmonton, Alberta, on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional meeting ground, gathering place, and traveling route for the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Stoney Nakoda. I would like to acknowledge all of the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. I believe a treaty is an inheritance, a responsibility, and a relationship, and I hope that recognizing our status as treaty people is one small action of many that will help us to be good neighbors to one another, good stewards of the land, and good ancestors to all our children. I do welcome you to share in the chat at the treaty or land you are joining us from, if you wish to do so. Great, I think we have most people settled. So AMAASE is our monthly opportunity for members of the social enterprise ecosystem in space to access and ask questions of a panel of capacity builders. It is held on the second Wednesday each month from 3:30 to 5. So I'd like to thank everyone for attending today. There are always other places to be and tasks we need to complete. So I thank you for making this event a priority and welcome you to be present and make the most of your time with us. These sessions are designed with our audience and attendees being the driver of the discussion. It is your time and your questions that we are all here for. So I invite you to start getting your questions ready so we can make the most of this time while I introduce our panel guests. In order that I have them written, I have Dan Overall from Trico Foundation, Brittany Kurluk from Trico Foundation, Jordana Armstrong from Innovate Calgary, Brian Hill from Momentum, and Jane Bisbee from the Social Enterprise Fund. So thank you, panelists, for joining us today and for sharing your wisdom and experience with the people in the room. And I will invite the audience to start sharing their questions. You are welcome to unmute. We're a fairly small group. Raise your virtual hand, or you can type your question in the chat. We do invite you to turn on your video and speak if you are comfortable or able, depending on where you are. Is there anyone who has a question to get us started? Sure, Brendan, awesome. Do you want to get us started?
So I work for Government of Alberta Seniors Community and Social Services. We do contracting and procurement focused on working with vulnerable Albertans, helping to find supportive employment. And I guess my question to the group is, where does government kind of fit in to try and help support social enterprises in their quest to, I guess, do the right thing, but particularly around vulnerable clients, providing employment and supportive services?
Thanks, Brendan. Any one of our panelists want to get started on that one?
All right, I'll play my usual role, speaking up first. And I do this as a former employee of the Government of Alberta. So I sat in your chair and wondered the same sorts of things at one point. You're right, it's a huge question, but maybe I'll hit just a couple of things that I think are key. I think that it's important for, well, okay, first of all, I'll acknowledge that there is a lot of work being done through the creative partnership inside of the culture department, arts, culture, and status of women, to actually support and further the work that is being done in the ecosystem in Alberta to help social entrepreneurs get better at what they're doing and help nonprofit organizations in particular understand how to use business best practice. So acknowledge that they've put huge support into Alberta Seed, and Christine could tell us for hours about all of the great stuff that's being done there. So that's certainly a start. I think something that I think would be important for all government departments to do is to understand that social entrepreneurs, and I include nonprofits in that, are good providers of services. So social procurement is a really valuable thing that governments can do, to understand that they can purchase, not just provide grants, but actually have contribution agreements with the nonprofit sector, and through that be able to make possible the work of those social entrepreneurs. So you spend money buying services and products, so spend money buying services and products from social entrepreneurs. Make sure that that's a value that you count right at the beginning. So I'll stop there, and I'm sure the rest of the panel's got other ideas.
Thanks, Jane. Jordana.
Jane, I love I love when you go first, because it saves me some breath, and especially after quite a few events over the last 5 weeks, I need it today. So I think the other piece that I would add is big star on procurement, and exploring where some of the barriers internally might be to that, and sort of advocating for those changes. Because I think as externals advocating to government, there's one voice and representation that's very helpful, but also internally looking for those opportunities and challenges. From a different lens, I also think about the broader line of sight that government departments and ministries have on particular social issues. And as we know, social problems are solved in multifaceted ways, a combination of innovation and new things that go to market in terms of product and service delivery, but also the policy and infrastructure that can support different types of systems change. And so one thing that we've been really curious about with our USEED fund, so USEED Social Impact, we invest in social entrepreneurs, much like many of the folks on the call here today. We've been looking at, say, EdTech as one particular example. We have a number of innovators who have products that have gone to market to solve different challenges related to education and public education. And we see a lot of innovators who maybe haven't been successful in launching their products to market, but they have the energy and the intent to solve the problem. And so I also wonder what the opportunities for convening multiple different types of actors together, those policymakers, folks who are on the ground, not-for-profit leaders and other types of social entrepreneurs, to explore what the edges of some of the problems we have in social service delivery, education services, et cetera, to explore what the edges of opportunity for innovation are, because they're not always going to be market-driven solutions, but market-driven solutions can play a role. And so how do we repurpose the energy of entrepreneurs who are out there, really trying to solve these problems, but might not have the same depth of knowledge, and or maybe that one idea just didn't work. And so I've been really curious about how we can convene multiple different partners to come together to develop more multifaceted solutions, in particular in the Alberta context. So would open that line of communication, Brendan, if that's of interest.
Jordana, Brian, Dan, or Brittany, do you guys have anything to add?
Okay, my name's not Brian, Dan, or Brittany, but while they're thinking, I'm going to add two other things that I think the Alberta government should and could do. One is provide capital to social finance intermediaries in the province who are investing in this kind of work. The government provides capital to all different kinds of practitioners in the economy, but they aren't wielding that power for good through social finance, and I think they could. And that I think that if you examined the activity that the social finance intermediaries have carried out in this province, they'd find out that it's good value for money, because, oh, darn it, social entrepreneurs pay back their loans. And so it's something that it would be money that could roll over and over and over again. The other thing is systemic across all government levels. So it's not just Alberta that has this problem, but some social entrepreneurs, social enterprises find that suddenly if they have debt from me, for example, on their financial statements, The bureaucrats misread it as bad management. They don't know how, with all due respect, and I was a bureaucrat, so I can be rude about them. They don't know how to read a financial statement to be able to understand when debt's being used as a scaling tool and when this is a group actually growing a business. Because I consider the work that nonprofits do as a business. And so we have a problem where on one hand we're the province is encouraging people to use social entrepreneurial approaches, but then on the other hand they're being penalized in other departments. So it's just a lack of education and understanding across about that. We've got some work to do, but the government does as well.
I'll jump in. So on the procurement issue, I'm just going to speak personally and not representing Trico. I frankly struggle with government as a procurer. I get it in terms of local resiliency. I get it in terms of encouraging environmental practices. I get it in terms of encouraging ethical practices. I don't get it in terms of encouraging social enterprises, in terms of a government having to figure out, hey, should we encourage the social enterprise that works with people who have disabilities or from a marginalized population? Like, how do we actually do that math? And are we better off putting a business that's not a social enterprise out of business because it didn't get the contract with the government? Like, I struggle with it taking us down that route. I totally get how I'm a black sheep in that, but it seemed fairness to just kind of mention the qualms of that. I actually have packaging from toilet paper, where one set of toilet paper is, fighting climate change. It'll like do the trees. Another one funds like, breast cancer. So like, how do you now kind of pick, if you're going to be procurement, which social enterprise would you actually include in things like, and I suspect as social enterprise and doing good gets more trendy, you're going to have more and more of those kind of challenges. So that's like social procurement. Back is representing Trico. I think one of the bigger, wider problems with government actually helping social enterprise, and I have to say, for the record, the government of Alberta has been fantastic in just asking what help they can actually provide in building the social enterprise ecosystem. But the problem, I think, is going to be the ecosystem itself, and that frankly, we have not done our homework in actually documenting and collecting the data as to what the needs are of social enterprises. There's this great line of where at most we interview or survey social entrepreneurs once a year, but their problems change daily. Being like an entrepreneur, you have daily. So we're actually looking with some partners such as Haskane, and actually Innovate Calgary has been fantastic as well, is once and for all starting to collect data that actually provides more continuous feedback and understanding of what their journey is, not only throughout the year, but year after year after year. And I also should say the Trico Center with Haskane is helping us with this. So in a sense, if you really want to know someone's challenges, do your best to walk a mile in their shoes. We are nowhere near collecting data that walks a mile in social entrepreneur shoes. And what I've looked at is how other jurisdictions have done this, and Europe is very famous for this in doing like millions of pounds into government initiatives. And they'll do these once a year surveys. If you look deeply at the analysis they've done to kind of justify their policy initiatives, they're an inch deep. So, and it's like really scary. So we're encouraging the community to do its due diligence and serve the social entrepreneurs so that when government asks, we actually have well thought out, evidence-based decision making. So thanks for starting off a number of questions. I could tell if you're connected with the government of Alberta that you have a Flames jersey behind you rather than like both. You're a provocateur.
Can I follow up on something that Dan raised there about social entrepreneurs and social procurement? I do take your point really seriously that sometimes a social enterprise is not ready to wade into providing responses to government contracts. It's a big, huge, scary thing. And if you're not ready for it and the implications of what it means and what it means maybe to have a contract pulled, then you need to be cautious about getting into it. So it's not a panacea for everything, but it is a possibility. I have seen it work with those organizations that have experience. And I think sometimes they're able to negotiate better arrangements, even for grant programs or any kind of fee-for-service program, if they actually examine things and use business best practice, for example, to examine their costing practices. We had one organization that, after it did some internal homework, was able to figure out that they weren't costing their product properly, that they were selling to government. And once they could apply that discipline, they actually improved their operations. So, I mean, Dan, I take your point absolutely. I agree. It's not a panacea for everything, but it can work in some cases. And if the social entrepreneurs can, at least on their side of the table, think about doing it in the most business-like way possible, I think it can be useful. But it's not the answer to everything, for sure.
Thanks, everyone. And thank you, Brendan, for your question. Did you have any response, or did that kind of answer what you were looking for?
Yeah, lots of stuff to stew on there. The social procurement piece is obviously a big one, and we are recording, so hard for me to say a lot, but I've been pushing this for at least 5 years. Promises have been made, so we'll see if it actually goes forward. And I'll just tell a story about, we do have a project with Hope Cleaning. If you know Hope Cleaning, they work with women that are fleeing abuse, marginalized, provide wraparound services, but employment. So a tough part for my group is, we can put somebody in a nonprofit service, but they have no money to be able to afford like the rent, utilities, cost of living is tough right now. So how do we provide those services and help them skill up, become independent with a social enterprise that actually wants to do this already? But just a funny story is I was asking how successful they are, and they said, who do you think gets most of our contracts? And I said, well, probably the nonprofits and the government, they want to do the right thing. And they said, no, you guys just go for the lowest price. It's like oil and gas companies are the ones that are hiring us on. So you guys are trying to make this happen, and you're not actually doing it. And yeah, Daniel, to your point too, I was talking with doing an environmental scan, talking with somebody else around working with social enterprises, and they said, what about just regular business? Like, why should they be excluded from the market? And it is a valid point. It's like, it is a valid point, but if we put it out there to say that we want to move in this direction, maybe that encourages, it is almost social procurement in a way, because it's encouraging maybe other businesses that are not social enterprises, or not concerned about social issues, to start thinking about it, and embedding that as part of the way they deliver services. So I guess thank you, and I'm going to keep listening, and I appreciate this. This is great.
Thanks, Brendan. So the order I have, Jane, I did have Jane Cycling Without Ages. I did have you next on my list, and then I noticed you put your hand down. So I just wanted to check in and see if you still had a question.
I do, but it's kind of, I put my hand down because maybe it's too basic, but I'm still struggling.
No such thing. No such thing at AMAASE.
I guess, I've tried to do my homework and understand really the difference between nonprofits and social enterprises, and what those kind of big impacts are to making that decision. And I guess I'm still looking more as an observer, I guess, than a question of just kind of hearing and understanding and trying to learn more about social enterprise. So I started with a question, and then I was like, maybe it's not appropriate. And I see there's some other questions in the chat that maybe will help give me better frame of reference of the difference between the social enterprise versus the nonprofit. But if anybody does want to comment on that, I'd certainly be open.
Yeah, can I'll just flag. I think a lot of the confusion comes around, as a social enterprise, you can have a number of different structures. So there's no actual legal social enterprise structure. So a lot of the time you might be a social enterprise under a charitable organization, and you're a charitable organization, or you might consider yourself a social enterprise and you have a for-profit designation, or you're a co-op and you see yourself as a social enterprise. So that's where a lot of the time the confusion comes in, is that you choose a business structure and there's not one for social entrepreneurship specifically. It can apply to multiple structures, which, as Jane has discussed, can be a good thing, but then also can be confusing sometimes. So one of the things we talk to organizations a lot is choosing a structure that makes sense for what your goals are. So what do you want to achieve? And then what structure allows you to have that impact that you want to have?
That helps bring clarity. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Brittany. Did anyone have anything else they wanted to add to that question?
Yeah, I'll just quickly jump in. I don't know technically if you asked like the definition of social enterprise as opposed to the structure issues, but we do get that question asked a lot. So to the point where we've now actually created a blog, which we did today, which explains not only the ins and outs of the definition, but the bigger conversation that I'd encourage you to think about, which is the purpose of your social enterprise. We say that if you look at the definition of almost anything, the definition is the most boring part. The exciting part is not what something is, but where you want to take it, what you want to do with it, your aspirations. So if you're thinking more about the definition issue and what you want to do with actually social enterprise, I encourage you to check out the blog that Ida's just kindly posted.
Great, I'll do that. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jane. Hey, if anyone have anything else to add? If not, we can. All right, we will move on. And I think, Ladine, that's you.
Yeah, hi everyone. So my question is about I have a program called Kitoko. So we provide for the Black community to have their hair done for free, because we want to help our teenagers who always facing some discrimination and being bullied at school for having their hair afro. And then most of them now, they don't want to keep their hair the way it looks like they usually go. They're starting now to use wig or trying to look different than really who we are. So I started the program since January, but now many organizations are asking me to become a social enterprise. But my point is, if we start, because social enterprise to me looks like a business, are we still probably, if I decided to become one of these enterprise, I'm scared about, first is the idea is a good fit for a social enterprise. Secondly is, after becoming an enterprise, can we still be able to get the help we need to keep to fulfill our dream? Because we don't want to end up maybe if we don't get enough help, starting to change the idea with asking money to keep paying for the location, the electricity, everything that we are not dealing with that right now, right? So that's really my question is about.
Thanks, Ladine. Anyone, Brian, you haven't shared yet. Do you want to take an attempt at that one?
I'm not sure, given the topic of hair products, that I should be the first one chiming in, but cool vision. Ladine, am I saying your name right?
Yes.
Ladine, yeah. And so I guess maybe I'm having more questions too. I mean, this sounds like there's a definite social impact that's happening here, and you're trying to figure out the path to formalize that impact and what's going to be the structure and the framework around that for your vision to be able to be fulfilled. I guess a question I have is, do you ever envision the end client or customer paying for that service, or do you think most of the time funding or the payment would come from elsewhere, like a granting body or some other organization that's really invested in the same mission that you're wanting to provide? Or what's your vision for ultimately who will pay for the service in the long run?
Well, I was thinking in the first to have, because if we have our own location, we can still have selling some product that can help us to keep paying the hairdressers, because most of the hairdressers, I will not say all of them, they are mostly newcomers, because we know they can not ask for much compared to those who are licensed hairdresser. And the other thing is we want to empower youth so that they can be able also using that as a business, if they can, instead of just waiting for McDonald's. Because right now I have myself some teenagers. It's very hard for teenagers to find job. So when they get skills, they can still make money after that. So the whole idea, it's mostly about not only to take back our identity, but also give them skills that they can be useful for the future. So that's why so we want that, because it looks like it's kind of a little center where they are learning and they're also applying. And in the meantime, we also helping those newcomers who have skills but they don't have the language. But by the time they're waiting for the long line of ESL or school, so they can be there and in the same time learning and practicing English at the same time. So those are the little things. So we were thinking, most of the, I remember when we apply, most of the organization, we give you 1,000 and we say it's a one time for a program. So, and then I was like, okay, so, but the demand is so high. So until now, we're still going there. So like responding on your question is like, we would like to become one day independent, but the way I see things is it's very hard to become independent if we have to just if we have to do that by ourselves. So we need we really would like to have something that we can sell, so any product we can sell, so that it can help to keep the program growing and and help as much people we can.
Yeah, cool. My just initial thoughts, and then I'll see if the other panelists want to jump in. But I feel like, and we may all have a different perspective on this, but if you're looking ahead, Ladine, and you're kind of looking at what your costs would be for having a location and for providing these services, and if it looks like that end user is probably not going to be the one who's able to cover that cost, so that or pay the price so that all of your costs can be covered, it sounds like then you may be going down a path of needing to supplement with some other streams of income to make sure that you can break even or do better than that even with this venture. And so that, like, it sounds like it would be a good idea to consider the option of not just a straight up private entity, but something that could be more of a nonprofit, or some entity that could be able to access grants, especially if you're doing some employment training or some skill building along with it. And that doesn't mean that you can't then also sell products. That's what's important to know as well, that if you go that more social route of more of a nonprofit structure, then there's ways that you can still charge fees for things. You can still charge for products. That still can be a part of your plan. But that, for me, that's the important part, is just looking at, like, yeah, will that end user be able to cover all your costs? And if not, then it may be good to explore some different models. But I'm kind of curious what others have to say on this as well.
Thanks, Brian. Who wants to add their thoughts to Nadine's question?
I would say, Ladine, I would sit down with Brittany and go through some of their background analysis and how you could do some self-appraisals of where you are and where you might go. So I don't know, Brittany, I'm kind of calling you out there, but I
have some notes. So a few things I want to flag for you, and this ties in really nicely to our previous question that we talked in terms of structure, is that there's no, I know people are saying, oh, become a social enterprise, but as you're in this sort of piece of figuring out, well, legally, what do we look like? There's no social enterprise structures. So determining what your goals are can help you decide what is the structure legally that makes the most sense for you. And that's what Brian was alluding to, right? Is really understanding where's the money coming from? Like, what's going to keep your doors open, and where's that money ultimately coming from? And there's lots of different ways to think about that. There's also different rules if you're a straight not-for-profit or if you have charitable status around what you can and can't do. So one of the things we talk to organizations a lot about, as I said, is figuring out what your goals are and then determining what structure works best for you to achieve those goals. And one example that I was thinking about of an organization to think about or maybe even talk to, and this was from the first SBI years and years ago. So maybe it doesn't look the exact same now as it did years ago when I sat on a little panel. But Center for Newcomers has ethnicity catering. And what they do is they work with newcomers to Canada and they train them into working in kitchens and, gaining some Canadian job skills, right? And the way that at that time they talked about how they operated is they had the training side, and the training side was actually provided through government grants. I think government grants were paying for a lot of that, the training piece. And then they had the kitchen side where they had a catering business, right? And so sometimes that catering business might not offset all of the training costs, right? It's being aware of those pressure points of saying, you know what, we can handle one person, like a person coming through the door one time, but we can't have them keep coming back. And this is why. That's a pressure point that you want to be aware of. Or, you know what, we really want to get youth involved with this, and we want to help them gain skills and work experience so that they can get some really interesting jobs. Is that might add some costs to what you're doing compared to a traditional salon, right? And so being aware of all those pressure points is key as you start thinking about what your goals are and thinking through who pays, right? Like, how am I going to keep those doors open? And how does my social mission impact me keeping those doors open? And so what Jane was alluding to is we have a program called AMAASE, where we work with organizations to really start thinking about where do you want to be? What is that? We use a mountain. This is why I keep on going like this, is I'm making a mountain out of my hands. But like, where do we want to be? What are some of those pressure points that are in our model that we need to be aware of? Because even if you have a model, if you have this amazing model where there are social costs that are adding to them, and you think, you know what, we're not going to be able to pay for everything through our services. There's going to be some gaps in funding. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It means that you want to be aware of that and have sort of that maybe different revenue sources that Brian talked about and things like that. So that's one of the things. So Jordana actually threw in, I was going to say Ida, but Jordana was faster. So Jordana threw in our page there around funding. Ida, can you actually throw our training page? Our funding is only available to charitable organizations, but there is, all of our tools are free, online, accessible 24/7. So Ida's going to just send the specific page around that. So
thanks, Brittany. And Ladine, also just make sure you make note of the couple comments in the chat that have been shared by other audience members and a little bit more from Jane. If you want to copy and paste those out, because you do kind of lose them when we leave the room, some of the feedback that's there as well. Jordana, Dan, did you guys have anything to add?
I was just going to say, Ladine, great question. An additional thing you want to maybe think about is actually talk to your funders. There's some funders that are actually excited when you look at maybe generating more financial independence. Some may be concerned about it. So have a conversation with them. Just go, we're thinking about doing this. Is this something you prefer, or if this is something you worry about? And also maybe talk to, your volunteers of how they feel. Would they be excited about it? So all the people that you think are crucial to your organization, your salon, just have a conversation with them as to how they would feel about you looking at being a social enterprise.
All right. Jordana, any last thoughts before we move on? Awesome. Ladine, did that answer your question? Do you have any follow-up comments?
Oh yes, that was very good. Thank you so much. So the answers really open my eyes, and really I think they really open, really should see me where I am today and world. I think I have to think about it and really see how where am I today really, and where am I tomorrow. I'm going tomorrow and where I will be tomorrow. But the other thing that I forgot to mention is what about that even though we have this salon, it's not about just selling, but it's also about those hairdressers today. They can still have, let's say, we can still receiving other people paying, but for the youth, it will be still free. But let's say if you are a parent who come to do your hair, you can cut your hair, or you pay, but your child or your nephew, whatever, anybody else's youth, you can get the same service, but for free. It's also that's just something we can think about. So anyway, thank you so much. All your answers really helped me. And then I see most of your comments there. We could definitely go and have a look and see how things we can go, and then see what kind of structure I can have. Thank you so much.
I just want to add, Brian put a great resource that Momentum has around sort of thinking about designing your business. The other thing I just want to flag is the power of talking to other people that are doing similar things and have been there and done that. So are there other salons that have done something similar? How do they operate? How have they been able to, navigate some of those pressure points? Can be a really impactful piece as well to think through, because like as you said, those different ways that you can navigate some of those pressure points, right? Maybe the parent pays but the kid doesn't pay. Those are all different decisions that you can make in your business that are going to impact your sustainability and keeping the doors open, and also thinking through what makes sense for me, right? Like what makes sense for what I want to achieve. And there's tons of different business model examples, but it's also taking it, we call it owning your journey, but like ultimately taking that information and saying, this is what is really goes in line with why I started this mission, right?
Awesome. Thanks everyone. And thank you, Ladine, for such a thoughtful question. All right. And Randall, I see you had put several questions in the chat, so I will bring you to the hot seat, and you can start off with whichever you feel is the best place to start.
All right. Well, I would like to continue in a way with Ladine's case, where as she's speaking, it occurs to me that even a socially minded sole proprietor without a corporation of any kind could be a social entrepreneur. Does that mean that the business they operate is a social enterprise? That's my first question. And I guess, I'm looking for clarification as to where a social enterprise begins and ends, because we know about corporations who, grab everything they can with one hand, but give a charitable foundation on the other. Others who have an ethics officer and a corporate responsibility code, but maybe they follow it, maybe they don't. I don't know where, our definitions begin and end. And I'm with the Wayfinders Business Cooperative. Is it by definition a social enterprise just because it's democratic, or does it have to meet some other criteria as well? So I'm open to listen to answers.
Thanks, Randall. And I did post the Randall's questions in the chat because I felt they kind of built on each other, so you can get a feel for where he's going. And unfortunately, Dan, Jane is now using chat to call people out and making you answer this question first. So do you want to take a first attempt at it?
Sure. Again, I would encourage you to read our definition blog, but to answer your questions right away, as Brittany said, there's no legal definition of what social enterprise is. So the definition Trico has, Trico Foundation, which reflects, I think, most of the definitions in Canada, it's using business models. So you're selling a product or service to serve a social end. And for us, social enterprise is the organization or venture, social entrepreneur is the person, and social entrepreneurship is the activity. Been doing this so long, I've actually forgot how to do it. In terms of your answer, there are actually, particularly in Europe and Quebec, but in other areas, who define that social purpose, not necessarily on the product you do, but how you do it. So the fact that you create a cooperative to actually share the wealth or be democratic would easily qualify in the definition of social entrepreneurship. So that's like the kind of broad, basic strokes. I hope that answers all your questions, but please let me know if it doesn't. A lot is going to depend on the definition. And if you've got one person telling you your definition, you've got one definition. You're going to have to speak to other people as to what definitions they use.
All right, oh, that's helpful. I'm hoping to get still more clarity as we go forward, because in any like social or cultural movement, as it gets up momentum over the years, you get more specialized kind of areas, and we could have a typology of social enterprises. I mean, I don't know if there is one, but it would make sense at some point. It is part of the maturity of this movement.
Well, that's a fantastic point. But let's remember what the job of a definition is, right? The job of a definition is to set the floor, not the ceiling. And I feel that sometimes in the social impact space, we use the definition to create the ceiling. So for example, there was this trend, and Europe was very bad for it, where they realized that the best practices for social enterprise are the ones that reinvest at least 50%. So for a while, that was included in the definition. To be a social enterprise, in addition to having a social purpose, you have to reinvest at least 50%. And in fact, for a while, the federal government used that. They kind of moved away from that because it's kind of silly, right? Because there might be situations where you're well-intended as a social enterprise and you've got some investment, so you're paying more than 50% to pay off that debt. Doesn't mean that you're not a well-intended social enterprise, right? Or even look at the definition of a car. It's very, very basic. There's all these other kind of cars, right? So yes, I agree with you. As we get more and more specialized, we should have a better understanding of very specific types of social enterprises. But let's keep the definition very basic and generic. Trico takes the position of, we want like a wide tent where everybody's welcome, but also aspirational, where we kind of push the conversation. So have the definition be wide tent, but our aspirations and conversations that aren't reflected in the definition should be that kind of specificity that you're talking about, Randall, because you want it, it's going to evolve, right? So you want it to be deliberately fluid. You don't want to have to change the definition every time you have a new discovery of something pushing the envelope of using business models to serve social needs, right?
Right. Well, what I'm seeing is a very broad international movement, and it's kind of captured in the book by David Dodge on values. Is that, there's been a systemic bias in our whole economy based on profits and money and things that money can buy, which has left a vacancy in the social, cultural, and other aspects of like negative, externalities that we really need to be accounting for. And so we really need to build accounting systems that can capture and have these key performance indicators for social return on investment. We should all be using that. And every business in theory could be held to measure against those criteria.
Should be held to measure.
Should be.
Yeah. I mean, you ask a question about evolution, so I'll just talk about my own evolution around it. When I came into this area, I heard a social enterprise definition that was very much a thing. And what I see now, after working in it for about a dozen years, is that the magic to me is around social entrepreneurship and the promise it gives to any business, regardless of corporate structure. It's about teaching best business practice and giving all those secrets to our nonprofit part of the economy, as well as requiring more responsibility for community and to stakeholders, not just shareholders, in the for-profit part. So I see the perfect, we used to have this sort of spectrum, at one end was the Fortune 500s, and at the other end where the charitable status organizations. I want to squish everybody in the middle. I want everybody to get to this. So where this great divide no longer is there, and that we are providing the tools that are necessary to everybody to get better at doing the good stuff that they should be doing in the community. So
Very good.
I just like to build on this point and add, Randall, you mentioned values, and I think a lot of us on the call, though I won't speak for my peers and colleagues here, probably hope for a time where we don't have the word social in front of enterprise, because as a society, the way that our businesses operate are accounting for those externalities. They do develop cultures that value people and planet, and I think ultimately consider like a very broad definition of sustainability, from environmental to the individuals working within them. I think that's a very ideal state on the other side of capitalism. But I think sometimes when we get too hung up in the conversation of definitions, we forget that exactly what you named it. We need to make a societal value shift, because there's always going to be bad actors that are going to call themselves social enterprises because it's a marketing trend. But frankly, they're replicating the same systems that have caused the type of resource degradation or extraction that we maybe are creating some of the challenges that we're facing now today. So I think that as much as I think there's a philosophical sort of revolution, to put that gently, and a shift in culture and values that we sort of need to be operating within, rather than focusing too much on the definitions. And the anecdote I want to add, two pieces. I was kind of looking, and the researchers out of Carleton that I met at the Answer conference last summer, which is the Association for Nonprofits and Social Economy Research. I'm going to try to find that paper and send it out in these links, because I can't remember the researcher off the top of my head. But when they looked at who self-selected into social enterprise and what they were really doing differently, there was one common thread, which was the moral compass that they used to operate the business. Everything from how they procured, how they developed culture, the delivery of their product and service. And so to me, that's actually also this positive indication that this social enterprise movement, as you talked about, is representative of this broader kind of responsibility that we as a society expect from different types of businesses. And it's a merger or a recognition that the word value, there's financial value, there's social value, but they're actually not so different, because keeping someone off of someone who is at risk from gang violence as a young person, keeping them off the street through a social enterprise that helps them build identity and find employment opportunities to align to who they are, that's actually not only just a social benefit, but of course there's a direct economic benefit in terms of that person's ability to pay taxes. And so we've treated these things as though they're very separate, but they're value creation in our society is not as siloed as we'd like to make it. So anyways, I appreciate the question, and I think I'm gonna end my little rant now, because
Thanks, Jordana. Brian, did you have anything you wanted to add? I don't know that you've jumped in on this question yet.
Quick, I would just say, I have two hats that I wear. One is Momentum charitable organization, and we're running some fee-based programs that are social enterprises. We're trying to charge fees for training that we're offering for people. That's a route, and that's social enterprise that's happening. And my other hat that I wear is as a co-founder of an e-bike company, and we're a for-profit organization, and we sell bikes. So that's a pretty capitalistic transaction that's happening. But we also have a vision to change the way people move in our cities. And we think that an e-bike could revolutionize transportation one day. And so we meet with city councilors. We try to get more biking infrastructure in Calgary. We try to teach people, educate people about e-bikes, et cetera. And I'm not so loud about that being a social enterprise, but I think it kind of is too. It's creating some good in the world. We really believe in what we're doing. And so it just kind of reinforces what people have said of it's so many, it shows up in so many ways. It's kind of a mindset and a way of doing things. So yeah, I just echo what others have said.
Thanks, Brian. Randall, any follow-up questions on that? We don't have any questions in the queue, so you're welcome to ask one more question if you'd like.
Well, I tend to go too philosophical, and I get people, try to be more practical, I suppose. Well, okay. We talk about things like impact investing and social finance. And I mean, there's these new terms coming out, and I'm not sure, what to make of what's going on here. Ethical funds, are these all the same thing, or are they somehow different from one another?
Oh, that's a good question. Who knows? Um, so there are different people call themselves different ways, and then new terms come up and they get used for a while. What does it all really mean? It's kind of like trying to find a definition for social enterprise. And how much is enough to be able to call yourself a social finance intermediary, which is the current federal government term on this. You'll find a lot of chatter in the financial pages around impact investing because it's a good marketing tool. We have impact. We want to do the right thing in community. So then it's a matter of, yeah, well, okay, how much impact? And what does that mean really? And how do you report it? And do you report it? Or are you just trying to make yourself feel good and look good? So, and then you'll find different social finance intermediaries have different levels of what people would consider good in the investments that they make. I actually had a question from one of my investors around our investors table not too long ago, where he said, "Is there enough good in this?" Which I thought was like sort of the representative question. And sometimes people will say, "But we're a social enterprise. Why won't you invest in us?" And it's because I know that those people around that table have a kind of a threshold of what they expect to see. Like any investment fund, they have returns of some kind that they want to see. And sometimes it's on how much good is in the project. Whereas one of my colleagues in another fund, their investors might define the level of impact in a different way. So I think it's kind of not unlike Dan's discussion around, are you going to drive yourself crazy coming up with an investment, with a definition? It's when somebody starts that conversation about impact investing or social finance, my question is okay, who usually is, talk to me about what you mean by your impact investing, and how much are you actually, what's the difference, for example, between the table for impact investment practitioners and the Responsible Investment Alliance here in Canada? So it's, how long is a piece of string is kind of the answer to that question, I'm afraid. But it makes for fun reading in the financial pages for sure.
I might just add two concrete additions on top of Jane's comment. One, for me, when I hear the word ethical fund, my brain goes more to public markets. That's just my experience. And so I think one thing that's important when we're looking at mutual funds that we're investing in, or ETFs, you really have to unpack what that portfolio looks like and make a decision for yourself if you determine those investments to actually be ethical. To Jane's point, there's a lot of marketing right now, and I think that can be very challenging. And then when I start to swing into the word impact investing, I start to think, for me, I think private markets. And Jane just gave an excellent articulation of sort of that spectrum and the way that language is used. But I think one thing I just add to the conversation is, if you talk to fund managers across Canada and North America, the way that they expect investees to measure and report on impact, and the way that they measure and report on impact, is going to be completely variable. And Jane, you touched on that. And so I think one of the places, and it goes back to my philosophical rant earlier, I think one of the places that we have an opportunity to evolve as a sector is to start to get more meaty in terms of what we mean by measurement, what we're measuring, and how we can make that case for impact. Because like I said earlier, there are all of these related factors. The economy and social measures can be tied up together. And so if we can start to move as a sector to be much more quantitative and start to speak those languages, I think it would be really helpful. And some folks do that really well. And some folks look at their investment portfolios and they say, well, this kind of looks like SDG 3 based on what they're trying to do, but they haven't actually looked at what the indicators, when you dive into what the SDG framework is trying to achieve, what are those indicators actually, what do they mean to be SDG 3? And then beyond that, is that portfolio company actually measuring anything that says that they're actually quantitatively or even qualitatively impacting that particular indicator?
And thanks, Joanna. Any closing thoughts, Randall?
Well, yeah, I got so many questions. I mean, I'm very hopeful that the world of social enterprise, social everything, we start to break down economics into more public interest. That in some ways things get more blurry, but in other ways we try to make things more clear. But collectively we have to have some sense of direction of where we're all going, even if we're talking different language.
Yeah. If it's any consolation, there are discussions going on in many forums around this, and one that I've become recently involved in is the Social Innovation Advisory Council to the Feds. And the council members are all very clear that what we're after really is an inclusive economy. That's the ultimate end goal of the work that we're doing. So I'm hoping that all of this will eventually get us there.
There's another good term.
Well, I put another one. I put the sustainable finance in the chat. That's a new one. Anyway.
Thank you everyone for those contributions. And thank you, Randall, for the great questions and discussion. GBV Resource Collective, your hand almost blended into your fake lights, but I did catch it there. I see that you have a question. Do you wanna unmute and share?
Hi there. My question is, how can you measure the good when the statistics and the measurable good isn't very measurable? So I am trying to create my pitch deck on what my social good is, and it's around violence and supporting people who are affected by violence. When my social enterprise side, my sustainability is helping nonprofit organizations on the administrative side, but trying to find statistics on this is what they spend money on, this is how we can help, this is what the impact would be, and this is how we would be sustainable. Like, it's just a big ball of I can't find anything.
So just to ask some questions for clarification. So is this a pitch to investors, or who are you trying to put this together for?
It's a pitch for investors. It's also part of the business plan to find funding.
Yeah. So just a couple of things. One is that I despair of most impact measurement systems. To a certain extent, when you bore down into each and every one of them, there's voodoo economics somewhere in the middle of it. That they multiply this and it compares and it spits out as something else. But I would suggest this: decide for yourselves what your own impact goals are. What is meaningful for you as an organization internally, and that will always shine through. That's what your goal should be. How do you see the impact that you live inside your organization? And the second thing I would say is take a close look. This is a pitch is a marketing exercise in a way. The first part is about your internal business plan and why you're doing this. But the pitch part is tailor it. Take a look at what does the organization to whom you are making the presentation care about as far as impact. So in our case, I'm going to want to see how you work in community, how you treat your employees, how you work within your company, what's your governance structure like, how you treat your supply chain, all of those kinds of things. So take a look at what the recipient and end audience of the pitch you're making is interested in. And there's all kinds of clues to that. Take a look at what else they've invested in. I have a helpful Our Clients page where you can look and see who we've invested in. And that'll give you a bit of a breadcrumb trail about how you might fit within our context, right? And so I agree with you that it's challenging because the measurement systems are all over the map and there's a million of them. And who knows? Flavor of the month seems to be the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. GIN is another thing that IRIS is another measurement system. Different groups use different things. So it's kind of a look and see what they do. And that will give you that'll give you a feel for what they're interested in. And then that gives you some guidance about which of the many impacts you're going to include in your social enterprise are the ones that are going to turn their crank.
Can I clarify something? Which, like, going back, because I didn't write like exactly what you said down, and now I'm like thinking on it. So you had mentioned one side, and the social enterprise side is providing resources to nonprofits, right? And then you listed sort of the questions and the info that you were missing or you're looking for. So you said, like, what are their needs? Can you remind me of those?
So what our organization is, the social impact and the social side it's all social, but a help portal for survivors where we connect organizations to them quicker and curate a list of supports and an online filing cabinet for the survivor to keep and go back to. So that's our overall free, always free, all organizations in it, and that's all free. To sustain that database and maintain it properly in that, we want to amplify the nonprofit organizations' services and expertise on our website or web portal as a tool for individuals and organizations to see. Within that, we would like to provide fractionated administrative style services for nonprofits, such as maybe helping with a research project or collaborating with research, some marketing supports, all of the stuff that we as an organization already have in-house, but now we are considered a knowledge base and an expert in the gender-based violence and other violence area that can help them with their little project needs at a decent price. Does that help?
I think so. So when you had mentioned sort of like, well, what are their needs? What's lacking? Things like that. Have you talked to these organizations and asked them those questions and surveyed them? Because that would probably give you a good idea of ultimately what impact that would have, like those types of services would also have on their organization, right?
Yes. So we have, for example, women's shelters. We've done some focus groups where smaller shelters, the grassroots smaller shelters, don't have the capacity to have an in-house marketer or a grant writer, where we could provide them with curated small resources where they can remain in front of all of their stakeholders by providing them with standardized social media that they can download really easy and report. So that's one kind of
Example.
sustainable project.
And did you talk to them about what they could or would be willing to pay for that?
We didn't necessarily get into price, but so what we've done is we've created our package. We've determined how much it will cost. I guess the next thing would be going back to them and having another focus group saying, hey, this is what it would be. Do you think you would do this? Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just I sort of why I've been asking for a bit of clarification is as you're designing something for a customer pressure point or a customer need, also understanding what their needs are is of course a huge piece. Why is it a challenge for them? What would make their lives easier so that they would want to come to you for that? But then the other piece is we talked earlier on about pressure points in your model. So what can they pay? Who's the ultimate person paying for this, especially as you're offsetting another program type, right? Like another sort of offering, is that piece around really understanding what are the costs associated with what I'm doing? What do I have to kind of recuperate in order to offer that piece? And then also, can the customers pay for that, right? And are they willing to, especially because in a lot of these cases, they don't have that person because they don't have the resources for that person, right? So potentially partnering and like you said, fracturing off some of those roles and having those pieces might help, but it really depends on what the customer is able to pay, and then what you're able to provide too, right? Within that scope. So I would just say, as you're looking at sort of like, what would make their lives easier? What would they want to pay for? How would they go about this? And how would we work with them? Is always just keeping that end user in mind, right? As you're designing something.
It's almost like I have to work backwards. What would it cost us to create? What do we need to make for profit to be sustainable? And then work backwards to, okay, what would we have to charge? And then do you think this would be a fit for you?
And I mean, there's different ways. I think it's probably a chicken and the egg. Which way do we go about that? One of the things we work with organizations, so I talked about the mountain, so understanding what our goals are and what does that look like. But the other thing we do, and it's like really basic, but it's a super powerful tool, is just going through your key steps and costs. Like, what do you have to do in order to offer this? And then also, what do your customers have to do in order to access it? So something like if you had people coming to your thrift store, they would have to be able to get there. They would maybe because of the location, they have to drive there, which means you have to have a parking lot, right? Like there's all these kind of things around working through what you need to do, what your customer needs to do, what your beneficiary needs to do. Because even setting up this other side that you're subsidizing, there's going to be costs to that, right? And understanding that piece. And so then just even I get people to do it on walls. Ida, I'm asking you again, can you throw the My Actions assess page? And it's I think it's video 2 or 3. It'll say key steps and costs. But like I literally get groups to draw on walls just saying, this is everything I need to do to make this happen, and then start assigning costs to it. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You'll get kind of more specific as you dive into that, but sometimes you can automatically see a disjoint, right? And like I said, that's a pressure point. That doesn't mean it's not something we should go ahead with. We use our Blender canvas to go into that further, but it's like being aware of that, right? Because if you want to work with these organizations, but they're not going to be able to pay to offset that other side of your offering, you might have to look at grants, you might have to look at different things, right? So I would just I think that really big piece of you can go really deep into this stuff, or you can kind of just start like sketching it out and figuring it out. But I think that end user piece is really key, because it's not always like if you build it, they will come, right?
Thank you.
Thanks, Brittany. And we've actually connected before we connected at SVI. I'll throw my email in the chat, though, if you do want to reach out for anything. It's actually been on my list of things to do in the ABC world, to start a community of practice of directory holders. And I just haven't got to it yet. But one day I will convene that group and we'll all learn from each other and wallow in the stresses that are resource databases. Did you have any follow-up questions, or any panelists have any last minute addition?
I think one other thing that I have within that, so just to give you full scope, I've already designed the program. I already have 2 months worth of samples. I already have my description of the whole thing. When I spoke to investors to invest in our organization, their one question was, who is your customer? And I said, our customer is our nonprofit organizations. And they said, well, how are nonprofits getting paid? And that's by the government. So then they said, so your customer is actually the government. And what you need to do is you need to find out how much the government provides to these organizations for these different things. And that's where I feel like I'm getting stuck, because governments change up and down. But if I look at the National Action Plan to End Gender-Based Violence, they say we're going to give 300 million for this, and then I'm trying to split it out into, okay, this is how much organizations would have. The other thing is, this is how much the government spends on statistics for research programs. And, you know,
I'm going to wade in right here, because I'm an investor, and I disagree with the answers you're apparently getting from other investors. Your customer is the person who pays you, right? And so the nonprofits are your customer. The government may be their customer, but your customer is the not-for-profits. And so I think you need to go through the exercise that Brittany described of actually doing the customer discovery. Is your customer willing to pay? Do they see value in what you're offering? And are they willing to pay the price you have to charge them? And then you might end up with the exercise that sometimes that I've had described to me by people who are at business school, which is you go through all of that, you do the customer discovery, you figure out that they're not willing to buy your product or pay the price for it, and you have to conclude, well, that sucks because nobody's going to pay for this, and move on. So I would think Brittany has described a really important step that you need to do, which is take your costing now and go to your customers that you think are the people who are going to pay for this. Now, the government might ultimately become a customer because they would buy it to provide it to the nonprofits, but that's a whole different dance. So if at this point you think the nonprofits are your customers, go and have that heart-to-heart about whether they see the value in what you're providing, and if it buys them out from under having to do stuff directly themselves, then you're saving the money. I mean, it's always fascinating to me that nonprofits can find the money somehow for the photocopy contract, right? Because they understand they need the printer. but they say, oh no, we don't want to pay for that service. Well, it means that they don't see value in how it's going to solve a problem for them. What pain are you solving for them? And are they willing to have that pain go away and to pay you for that? So I'd say that's it. Brittany, go ahead.
Yeah, well, and I was going to say, and are they willing to use, if say it is ultimately coming from the government, are they willing to use those precious dollars that they've been given for your offering compared to other offerings as well? Because there's a lot of resources and different options for organizations. And so, I mean, ultimately, even if the money's coming from the government, you have no say on is the organization going to use 100% of that towards something like I'm offering. It's really coming to what is the if the nonprofit is the one who's doling out the money, right? Are they going that way? I guess you could claim the opposite if you wanted the nonprofits then to lobby the government to give them enough money for your offering, but that just gets so complicated, where I think there's probably a ton to learn by talking to those people that are going to be engaged.
Ultimately, if they don't want, I had someone come to me saying, we've lost the government grant, so we're going to try this social enterprise thing. And the response to that is, well, you've lost a major customer. What is it about your service or your product that they no longer want to purchase from you? And that's essentially the same exercise that you need to go through. Do they see value, sufficient value in what you're offering, that it solves a problem for them and for which they are willing to pay money?
The small thing I'll add to Brittany's comment, without getting convoluted in terms of sort of the kind of advocacy piece or whatever, I think understanding, echoing what everyone said, ability and willingness to pay of the nonprofit sector for fractional services like CMOs or chief marketing officers is super important, but also the volume of folks you want to speak to identify that, because if you speak to 3, it's not going to give you a good sense. So if you could put yourself on a sprint where you're like, in the next 6 weeks, I'm going to talk to as many different folks as I can to really understand what budget availability might they have, what are their key pain points in terms of some of the fractional services that you have the assets or expertise to deliver on, might be a good use of time. And I dropped the Owlet video in there because I love this example of rapid customer discovery. But if you have a positive indication that there is a willingness to pay, an ability to pay, one model I actually have seen work well in the food rescue space is a for-profit or for-profit social enterprise that offers a logistics service to food rescue organizations, but recognizing that, and this is based on the US, there's another one in Calgary, but they've learned this from that model, but recognizing that their nonprofits are their key clients, the nonprofits don't really have the capacity to describe their services. They've built like an ancillary service where they have really standardized language that nonprofits can put in their grant applications, and they on average charge $10,000 for the implementation fee for their software. But they've gotten to that phase where they have a little bit of sustainability in their model, and so now they can work on expansion by making it easier for nonprofits to actually access budgets. So they look at nonprofits almost as like channel partners in that sense, and make it easy for them to sell their service to the nonprofit funders, if that makes sense.
100%. We were actually looking at that our grant modeling, so helping them find the funds to help us help them.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for the, again, thought-provoking questions, and to our panelists for their responses. We are just coming up almost to the hour, so I will put out a last-minute call for anyone who has in the audience who might be hovering over that unmute button and have a quick question that they want to put forward. I don't think I see Lynn in the room, but we did have one other question proposed in the registration forms. The second half of it might not be something we can get to, but in case Lynn gets to the recording, we could do a quick roundtable of our panelists in just if they are aware of Edmonton area social enterprises that exist and maybe have proven themselves, or if you have really quick answers to the steps to start a social enterprise and prove its worth. I will both be woefully impressed and would open the floor to you as well. So just kind of open that to a last minute chunk to fill about 3 minutes here, and then we'll wrap things up. And I don't think any of our panelists, oh, Jane, you're the only one from Edmonton. So do you want to start us off, or do you want to wrap us up and make all the Calgary folks sweat a little bit?
No, well, I would just, I don't want to appear to be flippant, but we've invested in a whole lot of them. So it would be, I wouldn't want to bore us all walking through the list. The majority of our investees are, in fact, from Edmonton. I would say that the vast majority of them have been successful because we've had exits, a lot of exits already. So yeah, I'm not sure how to, without taking hours and going through the whole list, to answer that. I mean, I think if an organization, regardless of its corporate structure, is able to make use of social finance in a positive way, and we could split some hairs on positive because some have been better internally than others. But we have had situations where we've saved organizations from oblivion, and we've helped others grow, and others have not been quite as spectacular positive results. So, I mean, that's a really intriguing question. It could be a very detailed deep dive if we wanted to.
I see Helen has raised her hand, so we'll give precedence to those in the room. If anyone does have an answer from our Calgary folks who are no longer on the hot seat, I welcome you to throw it in the chat. Helen, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you. This is my first time attending this meeting. I'm from St. Albert. I know they're talking about Edmonton. It's just like St. Albert is just like, are we are we acknowledged we're here? And so I just started a new role as the social investment coordinator for the city of St. Albert. And it's a role my colleague Amy Mankinan has been the one in this role. So I'm just starting and trying to learn what is being said here to say, okay, to see what we could use for the agencies here in St. Albert. And I don't know who to contact for this group because Amy has been sending me lots and lots of contacts. So I just signed up for this and I didn't know what to expect or what to do. So just been listening. So I really know how to use the information here and the contact here that will benefit agencies in our community here in St. Albert. So thank you for having me.
Helen, it's really funny because I literally just opened up my email to grab Amy's last name because I was like, oh, you need to connect. She has a like, I'm sure that's probably where you just were because the meeting was at the same time as this. Is her network meeting was at the exact same time as this.
Yes.
So it's just funny because I was gonna send you that. So I think she's met with a lot of people probably in this panel and can probably direct you kind of where your needs are and what you want to do, but always happy to chat. And you guys are doing some really interesting stuff over there. So yeah. I'm sure your meeting today was fantastic.
Yes, it was fantastic. It was my first time attending that meeting too. And immediately after the meeting, I had to meet with Amy because she's doing a lot of training with me to understand how to navigate this new role. So yes, so we work with FCSS funded agencies and we work with other agencies that are not FCSS funded, but they are social agencies. That's what our department does. And we any information we get, we're always happy to share with other agencies like REC, not-for-profits, and other agencies here in St. Albert.
I would welcome, and I'm sure you should talk to everybody in a little box in this room. But I would say first, may I introduce you to Christine Spottiswoode from Alberta Seed, because I think that's one of the first conversations you should have.
Okay, thank you very much.
Helen, happy to reach out. And Victoria may have been in the meeting actually earlier today too. ABC has been attending those meetings for some time. And I would say happy to have you here. This is I find a great orientation to the ecosystem for those new to this space. And we do host, as I move into our close, the second Wednesday of every month. So we will have a meeting in December, I believe on December 13th. And so any questions you come up with, big, small, simple, or complicated, you are welcome to bring forward to the next call, and we would be happy to discuss them with you. We don't have a ton of time left, so if any of our panelists have anything they would like to share in terms of events or happenings, I welcome you to throw them in the chat really quick. And maybe just do a quick closing round to fill the last minute here of just what gifts you're leaving with today from our panelists. And Jane, I'll start with you.
Which Jane?
You, Jane.
Oh, me, Jane. I just always intrigued by the questions and the breadth of them. Things that seem to be a simple question to start with turn out to be really deep and interesting to answer. So thank you for that. And thank you for those of you who are here and took part in it today.
Brian?
Yeah, I appreciate being on the panel, and just I find that the questions force me to reflect on the social enterprise journey, and I feel like I'm in the midst of it, but haven't achieved anything big or to scale or anything yet. I'm just kind of muddling around trying to figure it out. So it's good to actually have a moment to reflect on some of the lessons learned along the way so far. So yeah, thanks everyone.
Thanks, Brian. Dan?
The questions, the answers, and the people, but that would be about it.
Thanks, Dan. Brittany, and then Jordana.
One, I'm loving the Brady Bunch layout that we've had today, and it's like really all I've been thinking about. But number two is one of the things I love about these sessions is as we get to talk to all these different people who are approaching social impact and social entrepreneurship in different ways, and just seeing how different people can approach these major issues and bring these really innovative ideas to light. So I always appreciate these conversations.
And Jordana.
Yeah, just to end on that philosophical note, I just appreciate the sort of exploration of the edges of where our capitalist system is, and meeting new faces and folks, learning from folks' perspectives who I haven't encountered before, because it does feel like we are moving in a positive direction on days like this where I've lost my voice from too much networking. It feels really meaningful to have these kind of conversations. So I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jordana. And with that, thank you all, attendees and panelists, for joining us today. And 1 minute over, I will let you get to your evening. Thanks, everyone.